welcome to the January meeting of the Norwich City Council Scrutiny Committee. This meeting has been conducted virtually and streamed on the Council's YouTube. Any decisions and recommendations taken at this meeting will have the same validity as if they were taken at a meeting at City Hall. So with that out of the way, welcome everyone to the meeting. I've had apologies from Councillor Patrick Manning. Are there any declarations of interest that any members need to make for this meeting? No declarations of interest. I've not received any public questions or petitions. Minutes. Are people happy that... Oh, so Councillor Oliver, you had your hand up there briefly.
Just to say you're quite quiet my end, Councillor Wright.
Is anyone else having difficulties hearing me?
Okay. I'll turn my volume up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Minutes. Are members happy that those are an accurate record of the meeting? If so, please indicate. Yeah, lots of thumbs up for that. Thank you. Under the minutes, Councillor Oliver, because I wanted to give you an opportunity, I think there's an item you needed to just briefly talk about relating to NHOSC and an item that you've raised with them. I wonder if you want to just do that now, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Essentially, I was aware of a resident, I'm sure she won't be the only person affected, whose cancer treatment surgery has been delayed, and it appears to be as a result of the pandemic. And I wondered how many people this was affecting. I'm sure we're all aware of similar, really sad cases. I understand it is actually on the NHOSC Forward programme for discussion in July of this year. Can't really be brought forward any earlier due to the processes involved, but they are, they are giving it due consideration. So I was quite relieved to hear that.
Thank you for updating us on that, which I think, as you say, will, that's something that's impacting many people at the moment. So I think it's important that you've been able to take that forward. So thank you for that. Item 5, the Scrutiny Committee work programme for the remainder of this civic year. We did have a proposal to, at our March meeting, consider the joint venture insourcing. It's been proposed that item is not considered with a view to perhaps looking at it 6 months down the line. We talked about this briefly at our members pre-meeting. I gather that Councillor Fulton McAllister may have, although wasn't able to be present at the pre-meeting, may have had some specific concerns around why that particular piece of work needed to be considered at the March meeting. I'm happy for, if members are in agreement, that we park the deferral until the February Scrutiny Committee when we can discuss it then, which, as it happens, is only in 2 weeks' time. So, and will give me an opportunity to liaise with Councillor Fulton McAllister and perhaps some of the officers as well ahead of taking that decision in February. So, are members happy that we'll operate on that basis for the time being?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I don't think there's anything else that particularly needs to be raised on the work programme then. In which case, I will move on to the main item of the day, which is the item 6, the Corporate Plan and Performance Framework 21-22. I'd like to welcome Councillor Waters, Ruth Newton, who else have we got? Kirsty Howard and Adam Clark, who will be there, and Nikki Rotsos to assist us with our deliberations and recommendations with regard to this item. But I think, Adam, you'll probably walk us through a quick outline of the reports, and then I know members have got some questions and suggestions for you. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Chair. Okay, so as Scrutiny Committee members will be fully aware, we do publish a...
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Sorry, Siri's just decided to join the meeting. I will... Obviously, Scrutiny sounds sufficiently like Siri for it to weigh in there. AI will take all our jobs eventually. As I was saying, before I was so rudely interrupted, Scrutiny Committee members will be aware that each year we publish a corporate plan, which is part of the Constitution, and basically it lays out what the corporate mission, vision and priorities are for the year. So alongside the budget, that really is saying this is what the council's trying to achieve and this is how we're going to resource it. And we're currently at the end of the second year of a 3-year corporate plan running 2019 to 2022. And as you know, as everyone can imagine, the world was a very different place in 2019 to what it is today. There's been a huge amount of change in the external landscape. However, the ambition of the council for people to, for Norwich to be a fine city for all, and those priorities about people living well, having great neighbourhoods, local environment and housing and an inclusive economy still remain absolutely the key things that the council wishes to achieve, and in order to do that needs to remain as a healthy organisation. So the corporate plan for next year, the recommendation is that though at that level the vision, mission and priorities remain the same to run through to the end of the next financial year, so that'll be up to the end of March 2022. The other aspect that's often included in the corporate plan is a sort of unpacking a narrative explanation of how those priorities will be achieved. That's not really sort of constitutional, that's not part of what is laid out in the constitution as needing to be there, but it does help to give colour to what the council is proposing to do. But again, we're in very strange times. So the approach that's being recommended for this year is that rather than producing a sort of in-depth narrative report which outlines activities, which, as with everything at the moment, is subject to change at last minute, we use, in effect, the COVID-19 recovery blueprint, which was agreed last summer and was reported onto Cabinet in December, as being effectively the explanation of where the council is putting its focus in terms of activities. So for the corporate plan for 2021-22, there isn't that normal narrative explanation of how the council will deliver its priorities, but should be read in tandem with that COVID-19 recovery blueprint. What there is in, however, that has been reviewed more in depth is the performance framework, which sets out what the council is proposing to measure to show whether or not it's making progress against its corporate priorities. So the effectively, although Stephen Evans as chief executive was in at the beginning of last year, he wasn't in place for the development of the corporate plan last year. With him and the new leadership team that's in place, there was an ambition to ensure that the performance framework was monitoring delivery of the key corporate priorities, especially in the light of where we are with COVID-19 and the very significant challenges that poses to the council in terms of resource and in terms of that need to be agile. Making sure that it was a clear and easy to use framework. So we have looked to reduce the total number of metrics to give greater clarity to the corporate leadership team and to other stakeholders around how well the council is delivering on its key priorities. What I should say is that although there is a reduced number of corporate KPIs, that doesn't mean that there isn't lots of other data that the council uses to track its progress and to use as a platform for discussion with partners about the key issues in the city. So things like the dashboard that's being used to look at the impact of COVID-19 on the city, which has been shared with some of the members around of the City Vision, the Norwich 2040 group. Obviously, there are individual service dashboards and data sets which tell us how well we're achieving particular service outcomes. And there's things like the local area survey, which is undertaken quarterly, which gives us an even more granular insight into how the council, how residents are experiencing the city, and particularly those aspects which the council has a remit around, such as parks, open spaces and safety. And all of those things are continuing. So you've got in the report appended the revised performance framework with just the covering of that vision, mission, and values. As I say, I think it's important to note these are not normal times, and so this is not the normal approach that we have taken in previous years. But I think taken together, the vision, mission, priorities, and the performance framework really give that top level insight into what the council is hoping to achieve over the course of 21-22. And just in terms of the Scrutiny Committee's role, as you're aware, again, as per the Constitution, Scrutiny have a key role in looking at this and asking questions and scrutinising what is in there, and also identifying other things that might support the council in terms of tracking its progress against its corporate priorities. So very much welcome questions, whether they're technical questions about the metrics that are in there, or about the wider vision, mission and priorities, or about how we've gone about reviewing this. I think that's everything that I want to say. I don't know if Alan wanted to add anything from an administration perspective on that.
Thanks, Chair. Not at this stage. I'm keen to hear what colleagues have to say about these metrics and the approach being taken during this time of COVID. I'm sure I'll be happy to make remarks later on in the meeting.
Great. Thanks very much, Councillor Waters. So I've seen hands up so far from Councillors Osborne, McCartney Gray, Ryan and Sarmezi. So we'll kick off with Councillor Osborne then, please.
Thank you, Chair. And my understanding is that we'll sort of go through the
oh yes,
each section by section.
Good point, and thanks for that reminder there. Yes, we've agreed that we'll look at it a section at a time. So we'll be taking questions specifically to begin with on corporate priority, people living well, on page 32 of your pack. So thank you for that reminder, Councillor Osborne.
Thank you. Just as a sort of general question, a sort of overall thing, I wondered if it would be possible to sort of know where those some of the KPIs that have been removed have been placed, whether they're all, to know who's responsible for which team, so that we can see them, so that councillors can see them, continue to see them, if that makes sense. So some of the ones that were previously in the report can be continued to be seen by members. That's a sort of general question. And then if I can ask a question about the inclusive economy, people living well metrics. Last year and previously we've had metrics on antisocial behaviour and people's feelings of safety and their sort of satisfaction with responses to their ASB cases. And obviously there is included in here people's feelings of safety, but I think there's quite a specific issue in regards to council tenants or also leaseholders reporting antisocial behaviour and their feelings of satisfaction or otherwise in response to those reports, which has been something that's been consistently below target for whatever reason. And I think that this is quite a really important issue, because it's something where clearly there's something that needs improvement. It's a cross-cutting issue because it's not just housing and it's not just antisocial behaviour team, it's sort of cross-cutting across the organisation. And it's about also how you can almost see it as a proxy of how the council responds to its tenants and leaseholders. And so I'd urge that metric could be re-included or reinstated. And it's a bit more specific than the people's feelings of safety, if that makes sense.
Okay,
thank you for that, Councillor Osborne. Who will pick up an answer there? Is that Adam, will that be you?
Yeah, initially, so just on the metrics, most of the metrics that aren't in there will sit within the services. So most of the data that we were gathering is still going to be gathered, because a lot of it was being generated through administrative data of services. So those services will still track that, but those service level metrics aren't in the normal order of business published for alongside the corporate performance framework. I'd say the corporate performance ones are the ones that are seen as giving the critical insight into whether or not the council is delivering on its corporate priorities. So that answers hopefully the first question. There are, so around, for example, the ASB response satisfaction, that will absolutely still be being gathered within the service and being used as a measurement for the management of that service, the director and the service itself, to drive change. And it would be a decision for the director in discussion with the portfolio holder and cabinet whether or not they would want to reinstitute that particular, those couple of metrics that we had previously, into the corporate performance suite. So that could be taken forward as a recommendation for cabinet to consider.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor McCartney-Gray, you were next. Does your question relate to the people living well section?
Yes.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Yeah, it does. Adam, thanks very much for that. I just wondered where because it's such a high profile at this particular time, especially, where we would collect the data for the percentage of children living in low income families and the total number of food bank uses. Will we still be collecting that data and using that to show that although Norwich is always seen as a very affluent city, there are parts of it that are not and perhaps need extra funding?
So yeah, absolutely. So the things like the children living in low income families, so though that data is national data that's developed through the indices of multiple deprivation, the ADACI aspect of that. All of that is published through Norfolk Insight, which is the county council's sort of data hub, which is extremely valuable but very dense. So there's a lot of information in there. What we've done in previous years it has been to take a selection of that sort of data and put it in what we've called the State of Norwich. So the State of Norwich is a kind of complementary data set to the council performance, and it shows exactly the issues you're talking about, that the range of inequality there is in the city, how the economy is functioning, what's happening with businesses, what's happening with housing, those sorts of things. So, which is very much the context for the work that the council is doing, but those things aren't within the exclusive gift of the council to influence. So, although we, as with many things, we weren't able to update the State of Norwich last year, what we were doing was gathering some of that data, such as food bank usage, within the COVID-19 dashboard to track that impact. So the food bank, Norwich Food Bank, have been providing us with that data on the food bank demand and continue to do so. And that does give us a really useful insight into where the patterns of that demand is, as well as what the scale of it is. And we'll continue to do that. So I think it absolutely will continue to do some of that selection of data from other sources to show the context, but not sit it within the corporate performance dashboard in the way we did previously.
Okay, thank you.
For that. Councillor Ryan, is your question from...
Well, actually, Chair, mine, I'd like to focus on our zero carbon ambition, so I'll hold fire on that until the Neighbourhoods, Housing and Environment section comes up. Thank you.
I'll make a note of that. Thanks very much. Councillor Sarmezi, is your question relate to people living well?
No, mine was more general, so I'll save it for later, Chair.
Okay, we can take a general one now if you want. So
it was just a process thing, really, and I understand exactly where our officers are coming from, but for ease of reference, it would have been nice to have had on one side of A4 those KPIs that were in and then not in out of the 60, whatever it was. But that's something for future occasions, perhaps. But not criticising the approach, but I just think it would have been easier for to manage the information.
Thank you for that. Anyone else got any points they want to make on people living well? Councillor Graham, please.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the KPI on the food premises moving from non-compliant to compliant, and I'd like some reassurance really that that doesn't create a kind of perverse incentive for finding places non-compliant in the first place, so that we can improve them.
I might ask. I'm not. I mean, would one point would be the integrity of colleagues and suggest that officers wouldn't be looking to sort of, as it were, manipulate data in order to achieve certain outcomes, and these should always be reflecting what's going on and help us to measure it, rather than become the thing that sort of drives unintended outcomes. But in terms of the mechanicals of that, of how we gather that, I don't know whether Ruth or Kirsty can just comment a little bit on where we source that data from.
I can say a little bit from fairly high level. Kirsty, chip in if you know any more of the details. I mean, I think just to say as well that in the reporting, we tend to include the commentary that goes alongside that, because I know with the food premises moving from non-compliant to compliant, I think the bigger issue is around how many inspections are taking place. And I know in the commentary for the performance report recently, the food hygiene team had commented that obviously their inspection numbers are lower, so that does change the overall figure. So I would suggest it's always good to look at the commentary alongside it. So I think that's basically, I mean, it's a proportion, so it's the total number of inspections they make, and then obviously how many re-inspections have moved from compliant to non-compliant, and that's data collected by the food safety team as part of their ongoing inspection programme.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Osborne, is this a question for this section?
It is. It's related to the food safety. I'm just aware that there's likely to be a number of suggestions for including KPIs, and so I don't want to sort of overload officers with including lots more KPIs, given that the aim is to reduce the number of KPIs, which I think is a good thing to do. And so I would like to know whether why food safety compliance is included. It hasn't seemed to have been a sort of issue that I've come across as much as maybe certain other things. Maybe I'm missing something, but.
Yeah, I suppose if we think about this, so the people living well priority encompasses a range of things, but they are around health, safety, well-being, those sorts of considerations. And in terms, again, if we think about the sort of first principle of what the performance metrics are about, which bits of those outcomes of people being healthy and safe and well, is the council directly involved in some sort of activity that delivers on that outcome? So if and food safety inspections is one of those areas where we have obviously a statutory role and a resource that is dedicated to ensuring that people are able to eat out in Norwich or eat, source food safely. So you're right, it's not an issue that it's not that there is a lack of safety, but it's an important area that if we weren't discharging that well, then that outcome of people being healthy, safe and well would be in jeopardy. So it's not, if we were performing badly in that area, there would be a whole series of very significant issues that would flow from it. So keeping it in there reflects both the fact that it is a responsibility of ours, but also that the outcome of us getting it wrong is really quite significant in terms of the outcome of people living well.
Thanks. And I suppose it's also a sort of reassurance to the public, especially now, we can say we are doing well on this. Fair enough. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Any more questions or comments on this section, people living well, before we move on to neighbourhoods? No? Okay, great. Thank you. In which case we'll move on to, oh, Councillor Carlo, sorry, did I miss your hand there? Is this a question for this section? Councillor Carlo, you're muted at the moment.
Sorry, I'm just putting up my hand, James, to speak sometime after Roger, please, on great neighbourhoods. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, great. Well, in which case, I'll bring in Councillor Ryan then to kick us off on neighbourhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. A big thank you to Adam and the team for the work they're doing with this, because we, as you mentioned, we are living in remarkable times. We have been in the midst of a pandemic since March. It has totally changed the way we operate as a council, and certainly our KPIs have to and will reflect this. But having a quick look through of what we've got here, I think to some extent we are underselling ourselves when it comes to our zero carbon ambitions. We've done a lot of good work here as an authority, and to limit it just to CO2 emissions is not going far enough, really. We need to widen this, and I just wonder why it is just, Adam, why we just refer to CO2 emissions when the bigger picture is zero carbon benchmarking. It is what our ambitions are for the future, both as an authority and how this affects the wider community. I wonder what your thoughts on that were, Adam.
So I suppose that, again, if we think about the key, the purpose of this is to measure how well we as a council are contributing to that Norwich 2040 zero carbon ambition. And our own activities are the sort of key thing that we can directly impact. That's not to say that we don't have a wider role in terms of civic leadership. And so what's carbon emissions from the wider city, other than just the council's activities, is important. And I think that's the sort of thing where we would say, for example, SEEP and some of the data that we are able to source from the scatter tool, working with some of the insight from people like the Tyndall Centre, is really valuable. But it is that wider discussion with other stakeholders in the city that helps to influence that wider zero carbon ambition. Ruth, do you have any thoughts on you were a part of the discussion around how we evolved the metrics and which metrics we particularly chose around that aspect? Have you got any insight you could offer, Councillor Ryan?
Both of the ones. So there is also in People Living Well, there's the number of properties or insulation measures implemented, which was also a sort of an environmental strategy KPI. So they were both existing KPIs from the current framework, which were agreed, kind of measured the key things, as Adam says, that we contribute towards the bigger picture. So I think at this stage it was felt that the environment strategy measured various other broader things, and that these were the key ones for us, for the kind of relating to our own activity.
Can I come back to that, Adam? I mean, I think things are moving on at a pace where it comes to local authorities and their zero carbon ambitions at the moment. I think you've got to get those words in there somewhere to reflect what's happening in the wider community. And I just feel you've got to tell people that you are thinking beyond CO2 emissions, beyond how that will affect us all. And also you don't want to mention all the good work, but the words you're using here are underselling what you're doing in a way. And you've got to paint a bigger picture and explain to people that we are connected to this and give them clues about where we're going to go to in the future, really. To limit to CO2 emissions, I think is not enough here, really. Could we do that? I mean, some councils do have out and out zero carbon strategies. And they're quite bold about what they're doing and where they're going to. And it seems from our KPIs here, we're perhaps underselling what we're doing because we have made progress. Can we work that in?
Sorry. I think if you want to make a recommendation for that, Councillor Ryan, then at the end of the meeting make a recommendation. I think what we're trying to do here is kind of keep this fairly high level, and we've got various other places, but I don't think we can agree to doing that. I don't think Adam can kind of agree to that, but if that's something you want to reflect back in your discussion at the end of the meeting,
I get that, Nick.
Yeah, I know you do. I know you do. Thank you.
Yeah, to be there, you know. Yeah.
It's a valid point, and if we want to make that as a recommendation, we can for Cabinet to subsequently consider. So, great, thanks for that. Well, just got Councillor Carlo next, and then Councillor Osborne, and then Councillor Giles. So, Councillor Carlo, thank you. Councillor Carlo, I think you're muted again now, please. Councillor Carlo, you're muted at the moment.
Got the same problem. It tells me I'm mute, but I'm actually not mute. Yes, thank you, Chair, Adam and team. Yes, I've got a couple of general comments first, and then a couple of specific comments on great neighbourhoods. Generally, I appreciate the need to reduce the number of KPIs. Looking at the list a year ago now, there was a very great long list, and it's been reduced considerably. But the corporate plan KPIs are public and outward facing, and I think that some of these, in particular in relation to great neighbourhoods, they're really internally faced, and I've got doubts on whether some of them need to appear in this list. There are 6 new KPIs in this particular section. One, for example, percentage of properties with a current valid gas safety certificate. Now that appears in the existing housing service KPI, and if it was removed here and replaced by something else, it wouldn't actually go a walkabout within the authority, it would still be there. But I wonder if it's a proxy for something else. Another one, the percentage of planning applications determined in time. Well, I'm not sure. Again, I'm not sure that it should be a high-level outward-facing KPI. I agree with Councillor Ryan about a bigger emphasis on climate change, and in the previous section last year, there was a reference to CO2 emissions from the local area. Now, I know that appears in the Joint Core Strategy Annual Monitoring Report, but that tends to get buried somewhat, and so it would be quite good to flag that up in this particular schedule. And then one I think that's missing is air pollution, which was adopted as a KPI, and I think it's very important, and that relates to particulates and NO2. And a general comment to support Jane on the need for a schedule of the KPIs that were used last year, a year ago, and the reasons for dropping them, and also where they are being dropped, where people can find them in other council documents. So I think that's probably all. Thank you.
Thank you. Adam, can I bring you in?
Yeah. So I suppose so a couple of comments first on the wider environmental one. So the air pollution and the carbon emissions from the local area, those two, which, as you say, were previously in the corporate performance framework as outcome monitors. Those are still being gathered, and I think I'm right in saying that they are being monitored or will be reported on under the environment strategy. But again, they aren't things that the City Council is able to directly control. You know, we can be the best performing council around our own carbon emissions in the city, in the country, and yet the city's carbon emissions could be going in the wrong direction. So those are considered to be metrics which are incredibly important, but aren't within our gift to exclusively deliver. So don't sit within this framework, which is, as I say, there to support the organisation to track what it's doing and ensuring that it's doing what it ought to be doing and performing well. So I think that would be on those ones. In terms of what is in there, I'm not, again, and I should have said at the beginning, you know, Kirsty and Ruth have done a stalwart job in terms of working with the service areas to evolve these metrics. The gas safety one, then there will be a context for that, but I don't know if Ruth or Kirsty is able to give us a bit of insight into that.
So I think the conversation that led to the gas safety one being included was originally around fire safety and gas safety being important things that corporately we were wanted to monitor. Unfortunately, at the moment, fire safety, there isn't an obvious KPI for it, but that's something that may well become a possibility for future years. But it was decided that gas safety would be worth including kind of under the banner of risk that we manage, and also the planning applications determined in time. It was felt that that was something that we are accountable to government on, and so it would be, again, something that would be good to kind of monitor at a corporate level.
Thank you, Ruth, that's useful. And I think a bit like the food safety one, that gas safety metric sits in the space of, if we're not performing well against that, then that's an early indicator there might be significant issues for tenants and residents from us not performing. So the good thing is, on food safety and gas safety, we have a good track record, but keep for members of the public, for members, and for the corporate leadership team to be able to see how well we're doing is really key to avoid any significant problems that might flow from us not performing well. I think Nikki was going to.
Well, I was just going to say, and also we have a legal obligation around gas safety, so it's a really important indicator for us that we are absolutely on top of it. So that will be why as well.
And similarly, the planning metric is one where if it is a risk if we are not processing planning applications well and in a timely fashion. That leads to a whole series of issues. And again, if we reflect on what the purpose of the corporate plan and performance framework is, it should sit along and inform and work with that risk management and the risk report. So the corporate leadership team now receive on a quarterly basis a combined report on finance, risk, and corporate performance, because all of those things sit together. And it is about ensuring that we are managing the services which have the biggest impact on residents and tenants in a way that avoids the big risks of things going wrong for those tenants and residents, and also legal challenge, and also living within our means financially. So they sort of take a holistic view, those three things together. Oh, I'm sorry, the other point you raised with echoing Councillor Samaisi, we can certainly give you a list of the metrics that are no longer in there. So we can just do a simple sheet that just shows which ones have been taken out.
Thank you for that, Adam. I did wonder on that point whether that could end up being a sort of recommendation that sheet gets included when that report goes to Cabinet and subsequently to Council, just so that it's there, and there's documentation of those, so that it's easy for members of the public who perhaps might be looking at our performance indicators to understand what's in, what's out, and perhaps maybe get some of the rationale behind it. Great, thank you. I've got Councillor Osborne next, please.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions about this great neighbourhoods topic. But if I can just ask one more about the carbon emissions first, and then I'll come back to the other ones, so we can just sort of finish with the carbon ones first. I appreciate what Adam's saying, that citywide emissions is not entirely within the council's gift. However, one of the key themes that sort of come out of all the discussions on climate change is really that the city council has a very important role to play in partnership working, and through the 2040 vision group, through the business climate leaders group, which are obviously not things that the city council directs, but it has an important role to play in. In that sense, including citywide emissions is an indicator of, can be an indicator of the leadership that the city council is taking on that issue. Relatedly, also, I think, it clearly we, as Adam said, we can be the best council in reducing our own emissions, but the citywide emissions could increase. My understanding is that when these KPIs are reported on, there is a sort of brief description of why there may be certain direction of travel, and that could then provide an important description of why emissions may be rising or falling in Norwich, whether they are on track to stay within a carbon budget, which leads me on to the point about what sort of form that could take if it were to be included. The key thing about carbon emissions is really the carbon budget. It's not even so much about the date, it's about we've got this block of carbon that we can emit before we hit a critical level of heating. And so we have that data already. We get the data from Bayes and from the Tyndall Centre on what the carbon budget is, and it should be, it's not very much work for officers, I say quite blithely, but it shouldn't be much work for officers to say, this is how much of our carbon budget we've used. This is we're on track to, whether we're on track to use up the carbon budget in a particular amount of time. And a final point on that is that it's also about, that's public facing. We talked earlier about the food safety compliance, and publishing this data to let the citizens of Norwich know that their food is safe. And you can apply the same principle in a way to climate and carbon emissions, and saying, look, this is the direction of travel in the city. We may need more to do. There may be more to do, but it's making that sort of clear, and also really putting it at a top level within the council's corporate KPIs, as I know it is within the corporate objectives. So I would strongly urge a recommendation for including that sort of citywide data. And then shall I come back on other issues on the great neighbourhoods?
Yeah, Adam, do you want to sort of respond to Councillor Osborne's point there, or we'll crack straight on with the
I don't think I need to, no, unless any of my colleagues have anything to add on that. I think that sounds like a formulation of a recommendation for discussion as opposed to a question.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Osborne then.
Okay, thank you. Just coming back to some of the things that were removed from the, sorry, I keep on saying that they were removed as if it's a bad thing. I think it's that are not in the new KPIs. One of them that was in there last year was people's feeling of community. And I think that was the first year that was reported on. And I think that is an important one, partly because of the sort of importance of that feeling of community and the way that might change during the pandemic. Obviously, that's something that Scrutiny has looked at before. It's also quite a cross-cutting issue for, sort of demonstrates how the council is performing in a number of areas. And it's also tied to some of the sort of what I think is really good work and sort of important pioneering work that the council is doing through the Safer Neighbourhoods initiative and through the RETAs, the Reducing Inequality Target Areas. And so I think that that would be an important one to reinstate. There's also nothing in here at the moment on green space and on access to green space. And again, I understand that that will be measured sort of within service areas, but I think it's, again, quite an important top level thing, as was discussed at the Equalities Information Report Scrutiny, that this also has an impact on health, on equalities. It's related to housing, and so again, it's one of those cross-cutting issues and reflects sort of what we want to be as a city, as a green city. Just checking. Another issue that I think could be is a concern that I have, that's raised very often through casework, is about repairs and estate maintenance in housing, and frequently that's people saying that things like bins aren't cleaned, or that maintenance is not carried out, and I think that that will be an important thing, both for the people of Norwich, it's something that's of great concern to them, but also with the insourcing of joint ventures, and that will be a way of sort of integrating their performance into the corporate KPIs, although I understand they'll be measured within the company anyway. A final one is, well, it's actually just a question about, it's mentioned an amended methodology for planning applications, and I was wondering what that amended methodology is, because I didn't quite understand that.
Okay, so just there's, again, I'll bring the experts in on a couple of these, but just on the question about bin collection, there is a metric in there around percentage of bin collections completed, but
specifically on bin cleaning is the communal bins is particularly an issue, but it's generally estates maintenance, including things like cleaning stairwells, and a slightly separate, but it's sort of the same thing, a responsiveness to reports of bodily fluids, and fly tipping as well, I suppose.
Okay. So I suppose that, yeah, again, that's probably a formulation of a recommendation there. On terms of the community, feeling of community, that's part of our local area survey, which will still be undertaken. And what we've been doing is taking some of the key headlines out of that and putting those in the covering report for Cabinet, so that they've got insight into that. So Ruth, I'll ask you to come in just on that, and whether or not we'll still be able to report those things that are in the local area survey, and also the amended methodology. If you understand the planning methodology more than I do, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so I think the local area survey, we did say that we would review the survey as part of this review of KPIs, and actually the review of KPIs has taken out most of the local area survey KPIs. So we would still like, I think, to keep monitoring, or services would still like to keep monitoring certain things, but we'll try and link them in. For example, the feeling of community will link into the citizen engagement strategy and make sure it's measuring what the sort of key objectives of that are, which quite likely will mean it stays the same and we can still report it, but some of them might get tweaked a bit. We haven't undertaken that review yet, but I know that the services were still keen to get that data about satisfaction with green spaces, satisfaction with local neighbourhood, and feelings of community. So that will, I would imagine, be gathered in some form, which we can report as part of the Cabinet reports, but will also be reviewed at a service level. On the change in methodology, the change is to use a trailing 12-month data rather than just quarterly data, because sometimes there are only maybe 1 or 2 appeals in each quarter, so that skews the data. So the idea is that I think, as I understand it, the methodology will be to look at the full 12 months up to that quarter, just to give a more of a sort of overview.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. I think is that everything covered off from Councillor Osborne's?
I think so. I think that point about estates maintenance is a bit not very well formulated, but I hope we can come back to them. Maybe we formulate it a bit better, and if we can't do it within this meeting, then maybe suggest it some other way.
Great, thank you. I've got Councillor Giles next, please.
Thanks, Chair. Firstly, just quickly on a specific point, I would concur with Councillor Osborne about including a KPI relating to estates maintenance. On a higher level, in response to what Councillors Ryan, Carlo and Osborne have said about inclusion of citywide per capita emissions, NO2 emissions, particulate emissions, etc. My understanding from what the officers said, and I know I've set this out a number of times now, is that this corporate plan, these KPIs are focused on matters that we have either exclusive or significant control over. And obviously the City Council doesn't exist in a vacuum. We live in a very unitary state with most power centred in Whitehall, and even on a local government level, more power centred at County Hall than in City Hall. Obviously we've lost our highways control to the County Council. I do think that if we were to include such KPIs in this corporate plan, then I do think we'd be looking at producing a fundamentally different form of document. And I think rather than amending it in a sort of piecemeal manner I think we'd be needing to have a fundamental reconstruction of it, which would presumably require a lot of work from our hard-pressed officers. It wouldn't just be the citywide environmental KPIs would need to be included, but also the socio-economic ones as well, on poverty, on inequality, on unemployment, etc. Obviously, these matters are all assessed by metrics that are presented fortnightly to cabinet members and their CSAs, and the shadows from the two opposition groups are periodically invited to them to view those KPIs and comment on them, and they can obviously then take them back to their political groups or bring them to Scrutiny Committee to suggest for the work programme for the following civic year. So in response to what, on a high level, to what some of my fellow committee members have said, I wouldn't be in favour of amending the document on a piecemeal basis to include matters that are largely outside our control. I think, if we were to produce such a document, then I think it would need to be fundamentally different across all three strands of sustainability. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Giles, for those points. I've got Councillor Carlo and then Councillor McCartney-Gray. We're still doing questions on neighbourhoods, housing, environment at the moment. And what I propose to do is, once we've done questions on the sections, we'll then go through recommendations that will cover any of the sections at that point. So, Councillor Carlo, please.
Yeah, yes, thank you very much. Yes, sticking with climate change, it would be possible to find a metric where the local authority does have full control. And I'm thinking about planning, for example. Norwich is the planning authority. One possible metric is net zero, the number of net zero homes built, or the number of passive house homes built, homes built to passive house standard. Just to say why I think that climate change is important here and why it's relevant. Adam mentioned the risk register, and climate change is on there, In my view, climate change should have been given a higher priority by the City Council on the risk register. But it is down there at the moment in terms of flooding and overheating. And the City Council clearly does have a role. The Climate Change Committee in December published its 6th carbon budget. And one of the daughter documents published was the 6th carbon budget and local authorities. And it was strongly emphasised that local authorities have a really important role in helping to cut carbon. And then the business and energy and industry department in the run-up to the COP26 is going to be publishing how the government's going to be reaching net zero carbon by 2050. And it's going to include a section on local authorities. So I think really we really must be playing our role here. And so I'd like to find something maybe in relation to planning activity. I've also got a small point, well, not a small point, but to raise an additional point in relation to household waste, please. And the metric at the moment is the existing one, the percentage of waste sent for reuse, recycling and composting. But I also would like to see the amount that goes to the percentage that goes to landfill and goes to incineration, because that's still unfortunately going on, and that needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carlo. Any points there, Adam, that you can pick up, please?
Well, I think so. It sounds to me like there's a sort of committee discussion to be had about what a metric might be that's wider than the current carbon one in there, which might be related to council performance. So, which may be something that needs thrashing out with officers who know more about what's measurable around that. I think. Ruth, can you remind me, did the percentage of residual waste that goes to landfill, was that one of the ones that was taken out from last year?
Yeah, I think there was a discussion about only keeping one waste indicator and sort of slimming down, and the residual waste one has been taken out and the recycling rate left in, although obviously again that would be measured still at a service level.
And it wasn't quite as simple, was it, that they're mirror images of each other? The one that we've got in there, so the percentage that's in there for the current metric, it's not quite as simple as the what's left is going to landfill, is it? It's as in they don't 100%, do they?
They're related, but obviously the recycling rate is a sort of proportion of the total waste that gets recycled, and that doesn't tell you what the total waste weight is, which is what the residual waste gives you an idea of.
So we're still measuring that at a service level, but it's not yet. So rather than having multiple waste metrics in this core suite, the one that was considered to be most salient was the one around recycling, etc.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got Councillor McCartney-Gray next, please.
Thank you. Just sort of a general point. Some of the issues that we're talking about and probably are going to be talking about at a more strategic level, which is potentially out of our control. I was trying very discreetly to find my copy of the 2040 vision, and I think I just upended all my paperwork looking for it. I assume so, some of those, if not the majority, will be covered in our 2040 vision anyway, and the committee that is built around that will bring reports to council and to cabinet. Have I got that right, or am I completely wrong?
Councillor Waters, can I bring you in?
You're completely right. So if we took, for example, the report that went to Cabinet yesterday on the towns deal, there was a significant part of that report was about engagement with partners and consultation, and it included a significant section on the 2040 framework and the partnerships. And certainly, and Denise will remember, I think the second conference we had, 2040 conference we had a long discussion about the challenge of global warming and what had to be done collectively by all partners and beyond that were involved in that conference. So certainly in the introduction that I'll be writing for this document, for the corporate plan, it will be making giving a lot of emphasis on the partnership working that we're doing to tackle some of the bigger issues, and clearly the progress on that will be recorded in the work that's being done by a series of subgroups, and there's a number with a relationship to carbon reduction, including a business group looking at that issue in a very specific way.
Muting myself. Thanks very much, Councillor Waters, for that response. Any more questions on this section? I'm conscious of time, and we can move on, I think. So let's move on to inclusive economy. We've got just a couple of KPIs on that section. Does anyone have anything? Councillor Fulton McAllister, I think, was first, and then Councillor Osborne, please.
Thank you. So I've looked through the previous key performance indicators that we've had, and I do need to say I'm disappointed that we've got so few key performance indicators in inclusive economy, given the values which the council holds. I think that I'm going to separate them into two areas, those which we have direct control over and those which we do not. Those we have direct control over, which are missing, are the percentage of council shop units which are vacant, because even if we slashed our rents to zero, we'd be able to fill them, and that would be good for our local economy. The Norwich market occupancy rate and the total amount of discretionary business rate relief given to not-for-profits. Now, not-for-profits have been hit harder than a lot of businesses in this time, because as people have felt the pinch, the first thing that disappears is charitable giving. So I think that is more important than ever, especially when we're relying on our not-for-profit sector so fundamentally through lockdown, especially the number of groups that have stepped forward to assist vulnerable people in our communities. And I think that absolutely needs to remain a priority. We've also got the proportion of Norwich City Council supply chain expenditure, which goes to Norwich and Norfolk businesses. Again, I think that we've had 2020 being a year of managing the pandemic and managing the council's resources and almost managing decline of business, of people's livelihoods, etc. We're actually looking at 2021 with a vaccine on the horizon, with everyone, hopefully, if the government's to be believed, getting at least one jab of the vaccine by September throughout the entire country, which hopefully, if they stick to their 3-month deadline, means everyone should be vaccinated completely by Christmas at the end of the year, and 2022, where we should be in a much better situation. Therefore, we should be basing our KPIs not on managing decline, but on rebuilding our local economy. And that's absolutely something I can understand removing half of the KPIs across the board, because actually it's very important that we are streamlining our processes and more laser focused. But actually, all of those KPIs and potentially introducing a KPI for business rate relief given to shop fronts which have been empty for 6 months or more might be quite useful in trying to ensure that we can rebuild the local economy and we have direct control over. Those which I'm disappointed are removed, but I can understand, and I don't know how people would feel about their reintroduction, but is the proportion of the number of new jobs, for example, which we could have an impact on, but not as direct. We could also have an impact on improving the gender pay gap through the city. And I know that's something which is still a council priority behind the scenes. And one of the other things I've just missed out of things we have direct control over is proportion of contractors who pay the living wage. Obviously, we are a living wage employer. That should be 100%, and it would be good to remind the public that it is 100% in our KPIs. But certainly as a recommendation, I'd like to see the reintroduction of the total amount of discretionary business rate relief given to not-for-profits, Norwich market occupancy rate, and percentage of council-owned shop units which are vacant, and proportion of NCC supply chain expenditure which goes to Norwich and Norfolk businesses, because they will all be vital in rebuilding the local economy.
Obviously, those can all go forward as consideration, as recommendations, but just to be aware that the final one of those four, we've not got a mechanism to actually measure that at this stage. So that's not a metric that we have been able to report on. So I think the main reason to take that out was that we had it in as a measure which we've not been able to produce data on. That doesn't mean
Adam, would you mind me asking if that's going to create too much of a workload issue given all the other things officers are trying to do? Because I'm happy to remove it if it was adopted and it created too much of a workload issue.
The fourth one, yeah, absolutely, because it's not gathered. Something like market occupancy rate. Obviously, we know how many businesses we've got in the market. That's data that we have anyway. But to track our supply chain is a separate piece of work. Okay. So that's definitely one that is. There is an existing methodology developed by CLES, which was developed around the Preston model. So it's available. It could be done. But it's not an insignificant piece of work to go through all of our contractors and do the assessment and produce the data.
Okay, I'm happy to remove that from my recommendation given Adam's advice on that. But it's something I think long term or medium term we might want to revisit.
Thank you for that, Councillor Fulton McAllister. Councillor Osborne.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, just picking up on that point about procurement. I understand what Adam's saying, but I also agree with Councillor Fulton McAllister that it should be something to look at sort of medium term, especially if we're looking at the council's role as an anchor institution. It's sort of feed into that work, I think. Looking back at the previous KPIs, I know that there were things in there about proportion of top earners with protected characteristics, but that is now in the equality information report, isn't it? So I think that's sort of covered in a way. My question about the metrics that we have now are they're really quite focused on bringing in new money, bringing new areas of council land into use and bringing in new money. And I wonder if there's something also that needs to be included about how we manage existing assets or the sort of value that they provide. And I'm not really sure how that could be measured. So I'm maybe looking to officers to see if there is a way of measuring that. But really, I suppose it's about, what are we already doing? What are the services that we're already providing? What are the assets that we already have, and what value are they providing? Especially as it's a time where there's quite a lot of economic uncertainty, and those may be at a time of change as well.
So one answer to part of that is the social value of assets. Some assets has been assessed. For example, our community centres, which I know we have done a social value assessment of, looking at things like what percentage of users of our community centres come from within the local area. So there are some measures there, but obviously that's partial. It's one aspect of one usage of one set of assets as opposed to the full suite. To come up with a single metric that says the contribution of all of our assets to the Norwich economy would certainly require some thinking about. But just to agree with you that point about assets are one of the levers that make up an anchor institution's impact on the local area, along with procurement, along with employment. So through the Good Economy Commission and other thinking that's going on internally, we want to understand better what the opportunity is around being an anchor institution, partly to improve how we are operating as an anchor institution, but also in exactly the same way we have with the living wage, use it as a way of influencing, engaging and encouraging stakeholders who are also anchor institutions in the public or private sector to use their employment, assets and procurement to benefit local people as well.
Thank you. I know that we're going to have a briefing at some point in the future when the time's appropriate on the council's role as an anchor institution. And so maybe this is something that can be revisited then with a bit more thinking. And I'd hope that that is something that Scrutiny can look at as well. Council's role as anchor institution, I think, is an important thing.
Thank you for that, Councillor Osborne. I'm just going to bring in Councillor Ryan next, I think. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. I've been largely reassured by what I've heard from Adam here this evening, especially with reference to our role as an anchor institution. Adam, I mean, what we're saying at the moment is we really haven't got the resources to do this. Is that what you're suggesting here?
Around being an anchor institution?
Yeah.
I mean, we are an anchor institution. We do things like the living wage, both paying it and through our contract supply chain, and through the work we've done with others, the city vision work, the procurement spend that stays locally, the use of assets that we are able to track, all of those things, we are acting as an anchor institution. I suppose the challenge is to find the resource to be able to really assess how well we're doing that, and then to identify the areas in which we can improve, and really make it a meaningful system-wide approach. Because where it's been effective, the anchor institution model, it has been system-wide. And so it's not just a council, it requires the local health service, the wider public sector to be able to play ball with that. The ambition is there. The health service is very much attuned to the fact that its procurement, its employment, etc., are really key. But again, the headspace isn't there at the moment for them to necessarily engage as proactively as they would like. But I think the mood music is right, but yes, there is a resource implication to us really making it a system-wide approach.
Okay, I understand. Thank you. Thanks, sir. Thank
you, Councillor Ryan, for your points there. Before I move on, Councillor Carlo, you've got your hand up. Is this question related to this section? Because Councillor Waters, I know, wishes to say a few things to the committee and has to go to another meeting. So I was just sort of trying to get to the end of the inclusive economy section before then inviting him in. So is your point, you've got your hand up, is that related to this section? Okay, if you
yes.
make it quickly, and then I'll bring in Councillor Waters.
Yes, I just wanted to ask what's meant by the new KPI, area of underused council land brought into productive use, because I'm a bit concerned that we might be looking at say, green areas on council estates and developing those, or areas of the public space being developed. So looking for a bit of reassurance here, please.
I'm going to hand this one over to the methodology experts to explain how that's being assessed, if I may.
I can give you a kind of sentence based on what we've been given, but I'm not sure beyond that what the detail of it is. So the methodology that we were given says it's underused land is defined as land where planning policies foresee change of use, or as arising from asset reviews which recommend alternative, more productive usage. So that suggested to me that it wouldn't be an area of public green space, because that wouldn't fit with either of those definitions. But I'd have to go back to the team that produced it if you wanted to know more detail.
Yeah, can I just add a point here, please, James? I think what I'm concerned about is areas of council housing being redeveloped to create denser housing areas, and some of the green spaces in between, not necessarily public space as such, but nonetheless integral to quality of life in an area being redeveloped and for additional housing. Because I know that Laura McGilvray has mentioned that in the past.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I don't think we can kind of comment on that really, Denise. We'll go back and see what it is. As I think we've said, it's not about building on open spaces, but I think you've raised a very sort of specific point. So we'll take that away and come back.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Waters, can I bring you in now, please?
Thanks, James, and apologies for not being able to stay to listen to the comments and observations on the final section or two. So I think what's clear is that this is stripped back and is focused on the services that we have direct control over, or a significant degree of control. And I've sometimes thought that when we've brought a much more padded set of performance data, which I also present, of course, at Cabinet, because it's my area of portfolio, we can sometimes, and this is not meant to be pejorative in any way, but what we're looking at is we're looking at some of those things that we directly run a responsibility for, but we're also looking at data, things that happen in the city or don't happen in the city, which are not our responsibility. And lots of questions about, well, why haven't you done more about X? Well, actually, it's much easier and much more pertinent to ask a question about why haven't you done something about X, or conversely, what a brilliant service is being provided, if we're looking at those specific areas which fall within our remit. And I think that's particularly important. I think the point that's been raised about, well, you've extracted some of that data from this new set. So where does it live? Where is it? Is it still a thing that can be applied? And I thought Councillor Giles' points, Adam's points about where that information is, through shadow portfolio holder meetings, through partnership working and so on, is an important one to make. But I think it will be helpful, as I think Jane said, and also Denise, about, or she reinforced the point, about having a schedule of what's been taken out, but where you can find that information. So, for example, the State of Norwich document. And I'll also refer to a couple of references from last night's Cabinet meeting about the Equalities report that is rich in performance data and tells a very clear story in a very accessible way, as does actually the information provided in the State of Norwich document. picking up a point which I think Councillor Fulton McAllister mentioned, which is, where do we mark the evidence of recovery? Well, I've just been looking through the report that went in December, which is the COVID and Recovery Progress Report in December, which has a very significant schedule of actions, status, comments, where things are. So there are a number of areas where performance information, and a lot of it is related to partnership working, which has really grown, particularly during the pandemic, but prior to that as well, through the work we've done around 2040. So it would seem to me that what we will need to sort of think about is where people can access that wider range of information, which I think is more effectively contained in sort of action-orientated reports, which regularly come to Cabinet, and of course Cabinet reports are available to everybody on the Council. Again, I think things like the stuff around anchor institutions, that will be a significant piece of partnership working. I think the economic recovery of the city, there's work going on with a range of public and private sector partners, the core of which is around the business improvement district, about how we redefine the city centre, and of course the reports that have gone recently, one last night, on there's the Transforming Cities funding, of course, but there's also the New Towns deal. So a lot of information. So we need to find a way in which we can alert people to that information, which kind of sits around many of the things that we are actively involved in as a council. But I do think there is merit to some high level, tighter number of indicators for things that we have direct provision for. And I think, as somebody said in the meeting, if, for example, we were finding that we weren't sorting out our voids quickly, or gas inspections and so on, that would often be an indicator of, I think, maybe some deeper systemic problems which would need to be addressed. But I do look forward to the recommendations coming up to the next Cabinet meeting, and I thank you very much for your thoughtful consideration of this report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for those comments, Councillor Waters. We'll move on to the next section and hope to have some good recommendations to present to the next Cabinet. I'm going to move on to healthy organisation now. Councillor Osborne, first with your hand up there, so fire away, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my question is about the business rates collection, and also, yeah, well, really just that, but which is about not just the, and maybe this is included in it already, but not just the amount that's collected, but also the timing of it, and whether, because I'm aware that there has been cases where businesses have reported that their rent collection is late through, I think it's NPS that manages that, and so it's sort of in the same way that the benefits actually, well, it will be more just whether rent is collected on time, I suppose, as well as whether rent is the amount of rent collected.
Ruth, am I right in saying this is business rates rather than commercial rents?
Right, yeah, okay, sorry, fair enough.
Yeah, there is a separate one about income paid by tenants occupying the council's investment.
Well, maybe that's what I meant.
Portfolio, but I don't think either of those are about the timings. It's more about the in-year proportion.
I think Councillor Oliver has dropped out.
Yes, I've just noticed that. Some advice about, with Councillor Oliver having lost the connection but wishing to participate, whether we need to suspend the meeting for her to reconnect.
I think I put a note in chats, Chair.
Yeah,
We can take a 5-minute break if you want to, Chair, and then perhaps Leonie and I can see if we can get Councillor Oliver back in.
Yeah, I think if it's important that if committee members want, wish to try and get back in again, then we give the opportunity. So we'll take a 5-minute break. Well, we'll break till 6 o'clock, and just while we try and get reconnected. So, thank you.
Garlic bread's in the oven. Oh.
Thanks, Sue.
Just a reminder to members that we are still live broadcasting at the moment.
Thanks for your patience, everybody. Broadband issues.
Great, excellent. Welcome back. Let's carry on. Zoom is being particularly challenging, I think, for some in various meetings today. Councillor Osborne, I think we were hearing from you, please.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and I'm not sure whether this should go into people living well, actually, but it's about antisocial behaviour again, which is about the response time for people reporting antisocial behaviour, and perhaps also similar sort of related metrics such as fly tipping, because again, this is quite is an issue where it sort of flags up where there's capacity issues in the council as well. At least it has done in the past, and so that's one reason why I think it's important to have it as a high level metric, and also because it's an area which frequently comes up as an issue that's not working.
I mean, again, yeah, all of these can go as, yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. I have a, before I bring other people in on the healthy organisation, I have a question about a subject which I'd take an interest in from a professional point of view, but IT system availability. Given what we've discussed so far today about slimming down those performance indicators that are available, this feels like a very internal one, to know the number of nines that our systems are delivering in terms of their uptime. Is there, I'm interested in the rationale about why this is included, and actually whether it includes just the systems that we directly control, or systems like Zoom, which we're using for this meeting at the moment, which has just there's been some downtime, not with Zoom itself, but with the council's use of it, and whether that sort of thing is recorded in there as well.
Shall I attempt to answer that? I think that's because obviously what we've been noticing through COVID and before, because we've been working very hard on getting people where they can to go online. I think it's aligned to that as well, James. So it's just because it's becoming increasingly important that people are able to transact with us 24/7 and online. So it's just looking at whether there are issues around those things, and whether because effectively we've got a permanently open door through our digital systems, so that has become an increasingly important thing as we move forward. So
that makes absolutely perfect sense, in which case I'm going to recommend we remove 3 words from that that indicator, which is during core hours, because as you said, we have a permanently open door, and we should be interested in how the public are able to access our systems at a time that suits them, not at a time that suits us.
We do, but I would suggest we do, you by all means suggest that. I think that's not possible for this cycle of the corporate plan, because of how because of kind of other implications that would have on resources. So I think that might be difficult, but by all means suggest that.
I mean that makes perfect sense. I'll take that on board and file it away, and we'll look at that for the.
We'll look at that again when we've got, as Adam said, when we're planning the next sort of round of things, when we're looking at kind of making more changes to the way we operate. Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. So who else has any questions they'd like to ask about the healthy organisation performance indicators? Anyone? No. Oh, yeah, Councillor Graham.
I just noticed the absence of anything about staff welfare. Wondered if there might be a way to put that in.
Staff welfare and well-being is a very significant issue in terms of something that collectively as a management team, it's something that there's been a lot of discussion about recently, because like everybody else, this has been a period of great challenge, and a lot of us have struggled with, whether that's with working patterns or juggling all the things, or just the anxiety of the situation we're in. So it's absolutely a key thing. I think the difficulty is how do you measure an aggregate well-being level across an entire team? It's something that there are HR metrics which are provided on a regular basis to the corporate management team, which tells us about, for example, the numbers of days lost to different types of conditions, including stress and anxiety. But I suppose that might be a level of detail that possibly wouldn't be appropriate to share in a public space.
Fair enough. Perhaps it's one we could pick up more straightforwardly next year when we have more capacity for it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also an issue about, I suppose, I don't know, members of the public looking at the council and I don't know, I suppose if you were reporting low well-being amongst council officers, that might have an impact on the city sort of trust in it as an institute. I don't know. I mean, I think there would be ethical issues to be considered in any metric around staff well-being.
Thank you for that point. Just so that members are aware, I've seen Councillors Fulton, McAllister, Osborne and McCartney-Gray indicate. So I'm going to bring in Councillor Fulton McAllister next, please.
So I agree with Leslie that it would be helpful to have some indicators about the well-being of our staff, and or at least how we are managing the service that the public relies on. And we've actually removed a number of things which, although it's not specifically well-being of staff, it sort of indicates that from the key performance indicators. And for example, those are the percentage of employees with development stroke induction plans in place. That would be incredibly relevant still to show that we're still being an exemplar employer to the public and leading by example. The effectiveness of learning and development and supporting employees to do their job, absence rates of employees, because any organisation with high absence rates tends to have low employee well-being scores, and it doesn't necessarily have the same ethical issues that Adam has suggested, but it is in the public interest, because the public want to know that we're ensuring our workers are in work undertaking the services that they need, and I was wondering what the rationale for removing those was.
Shall I come in on that from a sort of procedure point of view? So the performance report which goes to CLT now includes a separate section of HR metrics which are designed to allow CLT to have an overview of all of those issues. So it was felt that in the slimming down of the corporate KPIs, it would make sense to take out some of the duplication and keep to the sort of key HR KPIs within the corporate framework, but they are being looked at alongside the KPIs, the HR metrics reported quarterly alongside the kind of corporate KPI report.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Osborne.
I think my question's already been answered. Actually, Adam answered it.
Right, okay, great. Councillor McCartney-Gray then, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I'm sure we had a discussion around similar issues last month with the equalities report, and that some of the solutions and information that we need will come through that route as well. Is that right, Ruth?
So I think the HR equalities measures are reported in the equalities report. I think they're also being monitored as part of the HR metric set as well, although obviously they change less frequently depending on the sort of speed of turnover.
Okay, thank you for that. Any other questions on healthy organisations, or if not, I'll move to the discussion of recommendations. Councillor Sutmezi, please.
Right, yeah. Just a comment really. We've gone from a work perspective, such a massive change, and not necessarily for this meeting, but I wonder if there's going to be some opportunity to evaluate, you know, the working from home, the impact that's had on some workers, all kinds of ways. I think I've mentioned before about equalities. I think I've read somewhere that, you know, some women feel that they've been dumped with all the homeschooling compared to, you know, male partners, dare I say it, you know, or the majority, etc., etc. So I think it is, I'm not saying for this meeting, and I totally get what's going on with this slewing down of, you know, key performance indicators. And I think if we get a flow chart showing where the things are being, you know, you don't need to duplicate it, but some sort of flow chart, that's fine. But I think as we move into this kind of post-COVID, and I think it'll be quite a long time before we can even talk about post-COVID, it'll be longer than post-feminism and post-modernism probably. But, you know, we do need to reflect on that, I think. And I think for the future, thinking about how we evaluate that and this whole new world of home working and all the rest of it. Because I think there's sort of a lot of assumptions are being made, not here in this meeting, but generally in society, about what we can now do all working from home and what the changes can be. So I'll mute now, Chair. Sorry, that was a bit of a ramble. I'm sorry about that.
No, valid, very good point there. Thanks very much. So, are there any other points on healthy organisations, or shall we move to the recommendations? Right, we'll move to the recommendations then. So, scrolling back up, I think I have. There's a couple that relate to great neighbourhoods, housing and environment. And I might bring Councillor Osborne in a sec just to articulate those. I think they relate to ones that he suggested. So it was around citywide CO2 emissions and remaining carbon budget, and then metrics on estate management. So apologies if I'm incorrectly attributing those to Councillor Osborne, but
no, you're fine. That's good.
Was that one of yours, Councillor Ryan?
No, I think it was Jamie's actually. Yeah.
Okay, great. Councillor Osborne, can I bring you in?
Yeah, thank you. Just obviously, Councillor Giles raised a very valid point earlier about you know, if we include things that are not directly within our control, and we've got quite a different looking report. I think, having said that, there are a number of reasons why it is important to include the citywide CO2 emissions and or the remaining carbon budget. One reason for that is that also my understanding is that with these KPIs and metrics, we also set targets and, you know, where are we trying to get to? And this will be an opportunity to, you know, measure performance and sort of set those targets. Clearly, it's not entirely within the City Council's control, but there is a sort of with all of these issues, there's an element to which it's not within the City Council's control. You know, people's feelings of safety is also partly to do with the police and poverty and other, you know, feelings of security at work and things that are not entirely within the City Council's control. Likewise, the number of households in temporary accommodation, which I think is a new. There are a couple of new metrics on housing, which I think was really good ones to include. And again, that's something that is directly within the City Council's control, but is also in response to national levels of homelessness, sadly rising, and you can apply the same logic in a way to, you know, we've got a national baseline of whether carbon emissions are going up or going down or flatlining. And again, just reiterating this point about this is a reflection of what are the city council's priorities, where do we want to be heading as a city, including setting those targets. And frankly, if we don't include the citywide carbon budget here, where will it go? I mean, it will go into the environmental strategy, but my understanding is that it's got to be at a sort of top level as well. When you look around the country and see what other councils are doing, and I think this is partly what Councillor Ryan was talking about earlier. When you look around the country and see what other councils are doing, they're really sort of setting an agenda on climate by setting up climate change partnerships and setting target dates or potentially carbon budgets and measuring against those. And I think that's really something that we need to demonstrate Norwich's ambition on. And so I think it's important to include that.
And also
the estate's maintenance. Yes, well, as I mentioned before, that maybe needs a bit more working out, and because it covers a number of things. It includes repairs to council-owned properties. It includes cleaning of bins. It includes cleaning of stairwells. It might even include residents and tenants feelings of satisfaction with the maintenance of their estate.
I mean, on that, as far as our recommendation today might be concerned, it simply could be something along the lines of to ask Cabinet to investigate, including metrics around estates maintenance, and then allow that to be fleshed out perhaps after this meeting. Councillor Ryan, I think you had your hand up, please.
Yeah, to some extent, I agree with what Councillor Osborne was saying. And I mean, we have to be seen as an authority in the whole. And to do this, we have to be seeing what we are doing in the whole towards working towards zero carbon emissions. And we have to say that in the way we look at it. I was looking for something along the lines of a measure of how we are working towards becoming a zero carbon local authority, to state clearly that we are trying to do this. I think that includes everything. It does include how we do the bins, I mean, how we treat our staff, etc., etc. It's all part of the bigger picture, and I think it should be part of this, and part of this resolution, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Carlo.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to suggest the metric I proposed earlier, and that is in relation to climate change, the number of homes that the council has approved to be built to passive house standards, because that's certainly within the council's gift, especially homes which are council built, which are council homes, and the council is proposing to build a number of homes.
Thank you. Councillor Osborne.
Yes, just picking up on Councillor Carlo's point, I think the second one, I agree, is a sort of easy one to measure. The first one, when the council approves planning applications, that's not necessarily going to be, if they reject a planning application that is a passive house standard home, it might not necessarily be because it might be for other reasons, and so I'm not quite sure how you'd measure that. And it relies on developers coming forward to propose those passive house standard homes. So there's an element to which the city council can influence that, presumably through planning policies and the standards that are expected, but we would presumably need to change planning policy, including national planning policy, first before that can be done.
Okay, thank you. What's happening, by the way, in the background at the moment for the benefit of committee members is Emma is noting down these recommendations onto a sheet that will be subsequently shared when we've got to a point of having concluded our discussion of our recommendations. And at that point, I think we'll just go and fine tune some of the wording and the practicalities around those. So those are all being noted down at the moment. Any more on this neighbourhood section? Councillor McCartney-Gray.
Sorry, it's not on the neighbourhood section. It's actually sort of like overall recommendation. I don't know if you want to do, I thought that might have come first, but did you want to do that at the end?
I mean, I'm not fussed either way. It's just where they were around specific sections. I wanted to keep them grouped together, but if it's a general one, we can take that now.
Yeah, it's just a recommendation that we have some kind of appendices as to where the other data and information can be found, because that's something we've talked about. And we're taking them out, we're taking the matrices out, but the majority of them seem to be elsewhere within documents within the council, and it's just something you tend to do for reports anyway. So
yeah, so a signposting thing. Yeah, brilliant. I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you for that. Well, let's move on to inclusive economy. Councillor Fulton McAllister, if I noted these down correctly, had some suggestions around metrics on business rate relief for not-for-profit, occupancy of market stalls, and occupancy of council-owned shop units. Did I miss anything out there? Was that
and percentage of contractors proportion of contractors who pay staff the living wage, which although it is 100%, we need to be ensuring that's advertised to the wider community so they know in every document they see that we are a living wage employer. And if it ever did drop, then that's something that we'd want to revisit.
Can I think I'm right in saying that because we're accredited by the Living Wage Foundation, that means that we are the criteria for that is that we pay the living wage and our supply chain pays the living wage. So the accreditation itself indicates that.
Okay.
But it depends about the political or the sort of salience of it within a.
Yeah, it might be we just need to say it a bit more, but I think we kind of do say it quite a lot. But I think the thing about having a target is if we know it's 100%, it's not an indicator, it's a fact.
Okay.
So we need to just work out if that fact is a good fact, which it is, and we do say it quite a lot. Perhaps just need to say it some more. Yeah,
okay,
but maybe not in all those things.
With the first three in that case.
Yeah, and it might well be that we do that, Adam, when we've got the corporate plan by putting some things like that on the document. So we put the logo for the living wage accreditation on there and some other things, which is an easy way of going, aren't we brilliant at this, but not having to write it in as something else. So should we perhaps have a look at, are you happy with that, Matthew, as perhaps an approach?
Nikki.
Yeah,
it's
okay.
just, I think it needs to be like a stick of rock wherever you
absolutely.
look at.
And I think that's right, but where we've got badges we can use, let's use them.
And it's a really important point, because I was having a discussion with someone recently, and I know we rightly know how much stall that the council sets by being living wage accredited, but actually people out in the wider community in Norwich don't know that. They're not dare I say present at all these meetings and watching us watching our deliberations. So
quick question. Obviously Norwich City Council is establishing a company which I happen to be on the board of. Would that living wage point? I need to double check that we do pay the living wage, but obviously would Norwich City Council's living wage status be impacted by any of that? And if so, then would it be worth having that as a KPI?
Does
So
the fact
in,
that it's a tech company mean that it carries the accreditation carries through into?
oh, I don't know the answer to that, but
Yeah.
I do know that we, you know, I think with our JV partners, we pay the, you know,
Yeah,
they're our
I know
contractors, so
we
we pay the
currently
living
already
wage.
pay living
Yeah,
wage, but
yeah, it's I'll check. I'll check whether,
okay,
because
thank you.
we've got accreditation, they've got accreditation. I'm not sure about
Yeah,
that. Okay,
thanks.
no problem.
Okay, I think Councillor Giles, you'd indicated, please.
I was just going to say I concur with those first three that Councillor Thornton McAllister set out. I'm happy to second them. Obviously, the first one we may want to reassess in 12 months' time, depending on how the not-for-profit sector is operating post-COVID, hopefully post-COVID.
Yeah, thank you. Unless we've got any others on inclusive economy, Councillor Osborne has messaged me to remind me that I missed out taking any recommendations on the people living well section. So I'm going to drop back to people living well if there are any recommendations on that first section on page 32. Please, Councillor Osborne.
Yes, I don't know if it's just me, but Chair, you've gone quite sort of a bit. The audio is a bit funny. You can still hear okay, but it's just a bit funny.
Okay.
I've had similar issues with James recently.
Maybe my broadband's gone.
It's sort of reverberating, like you're speaking through an elastic band. We can still hear okay.
Well, we can just about hear you, James. Carry on, but you're sounding a little bit steady.
Yeah, the one on people living well that was talked about earlier was on tenants' risk, satisfaction with their ASB cases, and or potentially other formulations around antisocial behaviour, probably to be discussed with the antisocial behaviour team. And I think also Laura raised a point about food banks, which again sort of goes back to that point about how far is this within the city council's control. But I think it is an important metric, and for children living in poverty as well.
How's this for audio now?
That's better. First class.
Okay, brilliant. Right, excellent. I don't like wearing these headsets, but so Councillor McCartney-Gray, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I was happy with Adam's response. The data, an indicator that I was talking about, the data is collected elsewhere.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, are there any more on that section? If not, we'll move over to healthy organisation. Any recommendations on that section, please? Councillor Osborne.
Yes, the response times to antisocial behaviour complaints. Again, I'm not sure whether that fits best in people living well or here, but this is really purely a sort of the council's policy is that people should get a response within 5 working days, and I know that doesn't happen in a lot of cases. Sorry, you can probably hear my cat. So yeah, that.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or recommendations on that section? Councillor Fulton McAllister.
I do think that we should be putting as a key performance indicator out there to the public the staff attendance levels, just because it is indicative of the well-being of staff, but also it's actually in the public's interest, because if they're not getting the service that they need, then and they see that staff attendance level is, for example, above national average, then they may think that's a cause for concern. Actually, our staff attendance levels are below national average. Actually, our staff attendance levels are above national average. in terms of people attending the workplace, etc., and being present during their role. So I think it's actually a success story, but it's something which we should be striving to improve all of the time.
I would agree with that.
Yeah. Good point.
Okay. Any other suggestions for recommendations? And if not, I will bring Councillor Graham.
I just wondered if we could see the screen so we can see what's been captured.
You caught me mid sentence there. At the point you indicated, I was just about to say, if not, I shall bring in Emma, and then I saw your hand go up, so I cut off because I thought we were going to hear another recommendation. But Emma is standing by with the screen, no doubt.
Can you see that, Chair?
Yep, that's there. I don't know if you can.
That's better.
If you click on that, the arrow to the right underneath the sort of toolbar thing, yeah, I won't bother trying to explain that. It's just a way of we might be able to fit all the recommendations on the screen at the very far right on your screen. Go down a bit.
The bottom one. Can't see the bottom one.
Down a bit, and just over to the right. There's a little up arrow
just
that
above
hides your toolbar. Yeah, click on that, and then we might be able to get more on the screen. Yeah.
Got it. Still can't get that. That's right.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you can see everyone. So just speaking up, but I think Councillor Carlo suggested sort of two aspects, and that one is the number of houses that were given planning permission to passive house standard, and maybe Denise can correct me if that's wrong, which is the one that's relevant to the change in planning policy. And then there's the number of passive house standard homes that the council's built, which I think is a separate thing. And I think, sorry, I'll wait until Emma's finished here.
And give me some words to ask Cabinet to
This was Denise's, so. Oh, you're on mute, Denise.
Chair, I can't go for inclusive economy 2, I'm afraid. I can't do that one there, so I can't accept that one.
Yeah, sorry, this has gone. So
it's too wide for me.
So that should be under great neighborhoods, I think. There's.
Oh yes, yeah, that should be, yeah.
And number 1 should also be under great neighborhoods. Under people living well, there should be ASB.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, can I be heard? I'm not sure if I can.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Lovely, thank you. Yes, to delete point 4, and in relation to point 3, which comes under neighbourhoods, to ask the cabinet to report on the number of council houses approved for building to passive house standard. Approve.
This is not inclusive economy though, isn't it? It's going in the elsewhere, I hope, isn't it?
Yeah, it's neighbourhood.
Neighbourhood one, yeah.
Which one's neighbourhood? People living well.
See that one.
Right.
So Emma, where you've got the title inclusive economy, that's the neighbourhood one, and then the inclusive economy section starts between 3 and 4.
Thank you. Neighbourhoods, and then here. Lovely, thank you. Let's.
So, Councillor Ryan, you've got concerns about the wording of number 2 then?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should be concentrating on what we're doing as an authority rather than worry what having citywide here. And I don't think we've got resources to do it, to be frank. So I can't agree on that one.
I agree with Roger that we need to focus on what's achievable for us as a council. My opinion pre-COVID would have been completely different, but post-COVID, we need to absolutely do everything we can in our power to rebuild our economy, our communities, and therefore it has to be stuff we are directly accountable for.
And of course that presumably we can look at changing in a post-COVID world when it comes to this time next year, and we're looking to the new set of the new corporate plan and the new set of indicators. Councillor Osborne.
Can I come in on that?
Yeah.
First of all, in regards to including that metric, it's not really any work because we get that data anyway. We get it from Bayes and from the Tyndall Centre. In relation to measuring, focusing on what the City Council can do, as I've said previously, we can, and as Adam said earlier, we can be the best council in the world in reducing our own operational emissions, but that's only less than 2% of the citywide emissions. This is about, what is the City Council doing in its partnership work, which is a really important part of what the council does to drive the agenda on reducing carbon emissions citywide, which, to answer Councillor Fulton McAllister's point, is absolutely something that we should be looking at now, because the recovery from COVID has to be one that's a green one. It has to be focused on a Green New Deal. And we can't leave reducing carbon emissions until we've built the economy back again. We need to be doing that now.
Just to very quickly come back on that.
Yeah, please do.
I completely agree. We should be building it into the recovery. The problem is we have such lack of powers, and we have soft power, but that is something which we're not going to be as able to exercise because of all the other rebuilding that's also needed and the reduced resources that we have.
Councillor Osborne.
Just come back on that. If we accept that it's necessary to build back greener, to coin a phrase, then including this as a corporate priority at the highest level would mean that we are able to check whether, see whether we are giving enough resource to this. And also, we have soft power, as you say, and that's something that we should be putting all of our as much effort as we can into, because this is an absolutely important thing, and it will be providing jobs. Also, it will be providing the backbone of the recovery. And as I said previously, when you look at what other councils are doing in terms of setting up climate change partnerships, that is the model that's really recommended. It's what's recommended in the 6th Carbon Budget Report from the Committee on Climate Change, which Denise referenced earlier. And so, this is something that should be of a top level priority.
Have you got a metric then, Jamie, for number 2? Because it is very general. Yes, there isn't a metric there at the moment. It's just to include a metric. So have you got one?
Well, there is a metric which is the citywide carbon emissions, which I should clarify, by the way, because Roger was talking earlier about more than CO2 emissions. My understanding is that this is actually CO2 equivalent. So it's the important things, but or which can be worked out from the current trajectory of emissions, the remaining carbon budget, according to the Tyndall Centre. I mean, there may be other ways that, in conversation with officers, that the council's partnership work on climate could be included in these metrics, such as, for example, the number of businesses taking up certain incentives that so I think there's things through the climate business group, leaders group, or I mean, I'm trying to think of things off the top of my head now that would be reflective of the partnership work, but I think that could potentially be talked about with the 2040 vision team and
so Councillor Osborne, can I I'm just going to park the discussion on this item at the moment, because I just want to get a sense from the committee on all the other bits about whether we're happy with those, because this seems to be perhaps the most contentious at the moment. So putting aside number 2 on CO2 emissions, are we
suggest deleting number 4, really, James, point 4.
Yeah.
Yes, because that doesn't. And then in relation to point 3, replace the word building by construction, for construction to passive house standard. Yeah, great. That's lovely. Thank you, Emma.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anyone else have any comments about other things on the page apart from number 2? So Councillor Giles and Councillor Graham, please.
Thank you, Chair. Under inclusive economy, 4A, obviously that's not a recommended KPI anyway. So, I mean, just putting the logo on the report would be enough. We wouldn't need to take anything out. With regards to it says reintroduction of total amount of business rates relief and not-for-profit. Obviously, our Revs and Bens teams do have the ability to grant discretionary business rates relief to not-for-profit organisations and charities. So I think Matthew's proposal was to assess the percentage of organisations that have received such discretionary business rates relief. And on, sorry, I'm going too quickly for Emma. I'll let her catch up. And then on council-owned shop units, so I think that's occupancy rates, like with Norwich Market.
What I should say for some of these, and I should have made that clear, some of the specific wording nuances where something like that, officers will just pick up at the point of producing the minutes rather than necessarily needing to dot all the I's and cross all the T's.
Yeah, I thought it could just be misinterpreted.
Yeah, it wasn't specifically that one, but it got me thinking that I should have said that. For example, if something is sat under the wrong section, don't worry about that. That will get picked up and sorted.
And then Norwich City Council supply chain expenditure. I think that was in relation to a percentage of supply chain that's coming from Norwich and Norfolk businesses.
But we were going to remove that anyway and just revisit it later. So just a delete there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And if you could scroll down to healthy organisation, response times mentioned by Councillor Osborne, is that specifically relating to ASB or?
I'm sorry, I missed that one.
Sorry, that's response times in response to ASB complaints.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emma.
Thank you. Councillor Graham, I think you had your hand up.
Yes, mine was asking for, my point relates to number 3. It's more information, but I think it's information that we'll have anyway. To ask the Cabinet to report on the number of houses approved, built and retrofitted to passive house standard rather than just approved.
So the full construction presumably needs to come out as well.
That belongs with built.
How does that look?
Yeah.
I think approved for construction. built and retrofitted.
Approved for construction, comma.
Then take out for
Built.
construction after built.
Are we there?
Yeah.
I hope so.
So I think we've got consensus now on all items apart from two, to ask Cabinet to include a metric on citywide CO2 emissions and the remaining carbon budget. I'm not sure we're going to get consensus on that with any amount of discussion on that at the moment. So in view of the fact that some of us have now been in this Zoom call since just after 3 o'clock, I'm proposing that we take a vote on whether we wish to keep in or strike item 2. Councillor Samesi, you are waving frantically. So is there a point specifically related to the taking of a vote on this?
Sorry, Chair, I can't. Have I missed it? Did we put the one in that said we'd like some kind of a schedule stroke flow chart? Have I missed that?
Yeah, that was hidden at the top. So
I do apologise. I just couldn't see it. Sorry, Chair. Carry on. I do.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you. So let's have a vote on item 2 in particular. All those in favour of keeping item 2 in as a recommendation, please indicate.
Emma, would you mind unsharing your screen for me, just so I can see everybody on my screen for a sec? Is everybody okay with what they're voting on?
Yeah.
All those in favour of keeping that item in, please indicate. All those against its inclusion, please indicate. Thank you. That is lost. So thank you for that. Thank you very much to everyone for the very constructive debate this evening. Councillor, I've got Councillor Giles, and then he had indicated, and then Councillor Osborne. Councillor Giles.
With regards to the construction of passive house properties, I wondered how realistic passive house standard would be to include in a corporate plan KPI. I mean, obviously we built passive house standard in the Pointers Fields and Goldsmith Street and Rain Park, but we know that the issues we've had with Rain Park with the buyers in the private sector being willing to pay the additional cost associated with purchasing passive house properties. And my understanding from our housing, from our HRA strategy, was that we were looking, at least in the short term, at building to a higher environmentally efficient standard, but not a passive house standard, because of the issues experienced at Rain Park and the increase in costs in importing those products relating to following Brexit. I also found it quite amusing, as obviously there was an A4 newsletter that went out across the city from the Green Party with councillors Neil and Price outside Rain Park criticising us for building it to passive house standard because it was too expensive. So it's interesting to hear different things being said in the council on the campaign literature, but I'm very happy we built them to passive house standard, and if the Greens have changed their mind on that, then I'm very happy about that.
Okay, thank you. I had other councillors indicated. I think Councillor Samesi, did you put your hand up again?
Yeah, I wanted to support what Councillor Giles was saying, and I think there was some discussion at various meetings that I've been in, including planning, but I think this meeting as well, about the conflicts of, sometimes having to build homes for people to a higher standard, to a good standard, very good standard, but sometimes economically, if you go for the passive house, but I agree with Councillor Giles, it is gold standard, but also we have to. Sometimes these things are finely balanced, I think is the phrase we use on the planning committee, but just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Councillor Carlo.
Yes, I think the issue at Rains Park was the marketing. That was the issue that lost the money. But passive housing is entirely tenable. York City Council has just agreed to allocate land for 600 homes in York, built to Passive House standard, and a large number of them will be affordable or council homes. And in fact, they've gone even further than Goldsmith Street. They include the full panoply of energy efficient measures, not only passive house fabric, but also air source or ground source heat pumps and solar panels and so on and so forth. So they've really gone beyond the gold standard. And obviously that they see that as affordable. So I think, and also actually to add that the architect is Norwich's Goldsmith Street architect. So I think it would be worth looking at the York City Council example.
Thank you for that. Councillor Osborne and then Councillor Sands.
Thank you. I was just wondering if Emma, could you share the recommendations again? Because I think there was a point number 1, if I remember rightly, which was the estates mix should be under neighbourhoods, and then there should be a point number 1, which is about tenants and leaseholders' satisfaction of satisfaction with their ASB cases as a point 1 under people living well.
I was just going to suggest on the back of what Councillor Wright said, that if we tidy this up and send it round, then we can do that for you, because I am just conscious that some of you have been in this meeting with only a very short break for a very, very long time. So
just to make sure that the ASB one will be under people living well. Great, thanks.
Yeah, I mean that was all taken care of. I'm just given the obviously Councillor Giles made the comments about passive house. Are we suggesting we want to tweak that wording before it going forward as a recommendation to remove the reference to passive house, and or what was the sort of what's the thinking behind that?
I'm going to propose to a high environmentally efficient standard of the definition discussed with Richard Wilson as the service director.
Is that to delete passive?
Yeah.
That would be my view, but I don't know if anyone would second that.
I'll support that, Adam.
Happy to second it.
Okay, let's. I mean, what we try and do, you talk about, we try and on scrutiny sort of be consensual where possible, but if I need to have a vote on that tweak, I will do. So let's go to that. So that Emma, you'll probably need to stop sharing, but
okay.
So item 3, we've tweaked from what we sort of previously reached some agreement on. So those in favour of removing the word passive house, please indicate. And those against, please indicate. Okay, so the word passive house is removed. Thank you for that. Let's have that back up again if we can, please.
Oh yeah, sure.
Yeah. And then
let me do that.
I'm hoping that I'm going to draw this meeting to a close.
And then share. Okay.
So I can see you just over on the right of my screen. Does anyone have any 11th hour showstoppers? No additions at this stage, but any words that they fundamentally cannot sign up to for these recommendations from this meeting?
And number 3 has gone on neighbourhoods, has it, James? That's no longer there. It's going, isn't it?
Yeah, that's going. Yeah.
Right. Thanks.
Let's delete that one now.
Yep. So that's gone. So no hands are showing, and on that basis, I'd like to thank you all for your attendance this evening, and we will reconvene scrutiny on the 4th of February.
Just to add, I see that Emma's deleted not-for-profit before organisations.
Okay.
Yeah, it was specifically not-for-profit organisations.
So yeah.
Thanks, Adam. I didn't spot that.
Yep. Okay. Not-for-profit. That's noted then. Right. Brilliant. Thanks very much, everyone. Good night.